This podcast is sponsored by LearnAbletonOnline.com, a community of Ableton Live users connecting you to the pros to learn today's music production. Hello everyone, welcome to another great episode of Pro Music Producers, also known as the Ableton Live Music Producer Podcast. We have a super special guest today. He is the Ableton Territory Manager for Ableton Live. Thomas Faulds is his name. And he was so gracious out of his crazy busy schedule, flying all over the country, going to NAMM, to talk primarily about the new release of Ableton Live 10, which is pretty much like Christmas in February, if you ask me. Thomas, I know that you have probably a lot of great insight to share with us today. So thanks, man, for joining us. This is going to be fun.
Sure, thanks for having me. Happy Live 10 release day.
Right, it really is. But yeah, so just tell us a little bit about your musical background, I guess how you got started producing music, and then maybe share from that segment into how you started working for Ableton full-time.
Sure. Well, I'm primarily a drummer and a beat maker, and I started a pretty typical way, banging on pots and pans, playing drums in a school band, jazz band, marching band, and then playing in as many after-school extracurricular bands as I possibly could. I pretty much knew I wanted to be a session drummer when I was 15 years old. And, I'd do everything from hip hop to punk to country to top 40. And when it came time to go to college, I found out I could basically major in drum set by getting a jazz studies degree. And did that. About 2 years in, I kind of got tired of always being in someone else's band playing drums, and got inspired by electronic music, programming drums, music like Aphex Twin, Square Pusher, Madlib, J Dilla, Flying Lotus.
Classics.
And these guys became my favorite drummers, but they weren't drummers. They were programming with electronic instruments and computers. So I switched my focus to music technology and ultimately got an undergraduate degree in that. And after college, I only applied for 2 jobs right away. One was Native Instruments, and the other was Ableton. And I kind of knew this was the future when I discovered Live 3. It's the first software that really felt like an instrument that I could play. Everything else felt like it was a recording program. Yeah. And I was hooked from there. And pretty much been producing in live ever since, still playing the drums.
Cool. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of you online without you holding a push-to MIDI controller. So I know you probably do a lot of finger drumming on that, and I love that thing for programming drums. It's fantastic. But yeah, that's a great story. So I started out as a drummer as well, so I feel like you can relate to that in a lot of ways, and it's very convenient rather than carrying a drum set everywhere you go to be able to program drums and just play them with your fingers instead on a controller you can throw in your backpack, right?
And a lot of it is this idea of the potential for sound manipulation. Every drummer that I know kind of has the same favorite drummers and sets up the drums in a similar way and uses, conventional sizes and cymbals and drums. And once the sounds have been converted to ones and zeros inside the computer, I just am inspired by this idea that the potential for manipulation is virtually endless, and you can really take any sound and make anything with it, or you could build it from scratch. And a lot about it is what computers can do to music and sound that inspired me. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and there's all kinds of creative control you can take from that as well and get really, really creative. That's awesome. One thing that I like to ask our guests is if you want to share and kick us off with an inspiring quote that you love. Sure. There's so many. I mean, I like Ableton has the phrase, make music on all the promotional materials, and that's just so to the point. Right. This idea that nothing really matters outside of making music. It's all to support that. But one of my other favorite quotes was at the very first Loop conference in Berlin. Young Guru, the engineer for Jay-Z and so many countless hit songs and great music, he talked about this idea that someone asked about using presets in their productions. And he said, you know what? The piano is a preset. And you're playing this acoustic instrument, but you didn't create that sound. Someone else created that note. And I just never thought of it like that before. Like, it kind of blew my mind open. That's interesting. And then at the last loop, or 2 loops ago, No ID was talking about, was referencing that Young Guru loop presentation. And he talked about not only is the piano a preset, but a sample can be like a piano. You could take a sampled sound and be a virtuoso with it. It depends on how you think about it and what you do with that sample.
Right.
And that made me think of, someone like Jay Dilla that does, so many magical things with, pre-recorded audio.
Sure.
Those are just some of the quotables that has come out of Loop.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's really interesting that you say that. I mean, I've heard from several producers that like a lot of songs have already been produced or created, but there's so many ways of interpreting that or taking that sound that's already been used and making your own in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's so many hit songs that use the same chord progressions, but they're all their own song. It's what you make out of it. And I think the same is true with like sound design. Like you were talking about presets, taking that same sound or preset, making it into something completely different and making it your own.
Yeah, sometimes, the sophistication is in the details of things,
Sure.
A lot of people think all hip hop sounds the same or all jazz sounds the same. But if you really get into that music, you realize that it's the subtle details that makes all the difference.
Right. That's great, man. Thanks for sharing that. How did you get involved working for Ableton? Like, how did that transition happen exactly?
So actually, really organically, I mentioned I had previously applied to work for Ableton
right.
when I was like 22 years old out of college, and I ultimately ended up working at a Sam Ash music store for 5 years.
Oh yeah, I did too. Actually, there you go.
And
shout out to Sam Ash.
I would always meet the traveling, visiting reps, and kind of like that idea of traveling around and meeting like minds and kind of sharing things that we're passionate about. And it wasn't until a few years later, I moved to Chicago, and I worked at every music store in the city, pretty much, it seems like.
Yeah.
I found myself just telling all my friends about Ableton Live. All my friends are musicians, and we all had computers. And this was in the days of MySpace and YouTube, and you could really like record and release records yourself, and then also perform live with these electronic elements or loops. And a lot of the experimental jazz musicians I was playing with were really interested in these ideas, and I was playing in bands with all of them, and kind of got tired of hipping them to Ableton Live one at a time. It got repetitive, and I just got this idea. I saw Los Angeles had an Ableton user group that met up every month. I think it was Laura Escudé and people like Savius Beck. In New York, and Dubspot had a New York Ableton user group, and I thought, Chicago could use one of these, and it was really an excuse just to save my time and show all my friends at once. I did like a 60-minute presentation, 101 Ableton Live, very similar to what I'm still doing today. And then I discovered two things. One, I really enjoy teaching, and all my kind of retail sales experience, if you're an ethical salesperson, I find you're really an educator, just trying to help, your customers or the people you're talking to. And I realized I had a knack for explaining things and teaching things. And then my friends started offering me money to teach them Ableton Live.
Well, that's nice.
And as a struggling jazz drummer, I couldn't, I wasn't making more than $100 a night, to be honest with you.
Right.
To get offered, $50 an hour to teach live, something I would have done for free anyway, really gave me this bright idea that I might even be able to eke out a living just sharing and teaching people this stuff and answering questions. Then I became an Ableton certified trainer shortly after, and that kind of changed my life. I started teaching full-time at a bunch of different schools around Chicago, and people from all over the world would hit me up for private lessons. And
cool.
Eventually met Ableton when they came to Chicago, around the time of Live 8 and the APC 40, and they started asking me to go to local guitar centers and trade shows and do presentations similar to what I was doing.
That's great. So if you can get paid to do what you love, that's a good life, right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and if you can get your friends to pay you, that's even better.
Yeah, and a little bit later, one of the members of the Chicago Ableton user group got a job with Native Instruments, moved to Los Angeles, and hired me to freelance for Native Instruments as a machine and complete product specialist.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
Just out of the the Ableton user group, he kind of asked me to do something similar with Native Instruments, which brought me back full circle to graduating college and only applying to jobs at Ableton and Native Instruments.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it sounds like you continue just to pursue, I guess, your passions and journey, and it just worked out. So I encourage anybody who's listening, hopefully that's inspiring to you. But you mentioned the user groups with Ableton a couple times, and that's one thing I really love about the Ableton community. You know, I've been using Ableton for about 5 or 6 years, and I'm the user group organizer for Indianapolis and Indiana. And I love how focused the community is. Ableton's been really supportive of these user groups and like giving free swag for our events that like I've been coordinating with the other user group organizer here in Indy. And it just seems like even online, there's a pretty strong community of people. And the way that like Ableton's laid out and open source for people to like create their own custom devices and sound effects. We were talking about, presets and sound design earlier. It makes it really easy to share your own effects that you build, I feel like, with the world, and sending it to your friends and just having it just like, open and install quickly into any Ableton project. And I think that's just another great example of just how community focused Ableton is and how open source it is for people to collaborate. And I love that.
Yeah, I haven't seen any other company kind of in this industry that's so friendly, I guess I would describe it as, and organic. The thing about the Ableton user groups is that it all happens without Ableton really running them. I mean, you mentioned we send out free swag, but that's about it. We'll help promote it on social media, but at no point, do we tell you what to do.
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is just people who submit to Ableton. I submitted a request saying, hey, there's no user group in this area. Can we start one? It was like, sure, absolutely. And they, sent us a couple promo things on Facebook, and we just had people start flooding in, and I've met a ton of people through that, and it's been awesome. Just completely organic, like you were saying. But kind of moving into Ableton Live 10, it is being released today, like we mentioned. I wanted to ask you, like, what are some of your favorite features? Well, before I even ask that, let me ask you, what are some of the biggest benefits, I guess, using Live versus other software? We've been talking a little bit about Ableton Live, but like compared to Logic or Pro Tools, like just give me maybe a couple different, like 1 or 2 or 3 different things that you think really sets Ableton apart.
The main thing I think is that I think of Live as a solution for creation and for performance. And like I mentioned, a lot of the other software feels like it's for recording engineers. And for me, a lot of that is about Live session view and working capabilities. And then it really comes down to workflow. I mean, all these programs, digital audio workstations, essentially do the same things. It's about how they do them and how you interact with that. And I just find Live to be the fastest, most efficient, most fun, and creatively inspiring way to work. And for me, it's really still the only game in town for live performance. If you want to really go beyond traditional DJing and create your own environment for performance, I don't really know of much competition at all. And with Live 10, I feel that the most exciting thing has to do in this realm of sound. Live is really sounding better than ever, in my opinion, with the new devices and the new sound content.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I actually did a sound test. I went into Logic Pro and I bounced a song that I mastered in Logic. I'm Logic Pro certified, but I use Ableton most of the time. And then I bounced one in Pro Tools. I bounced it in Ableton Live 9, and I bounced it into 10. And I actually thought that Logic and 10 sounded a little more similar, but it seemed like 10 had more of a depth and more of a almost like an HD clarity type of sound, which it just sounded more high def. It really did, even the 9 in Pro Tools and Logic, and I loved it. It was just so clean. It sounded great. So I definitely know that there's a little bit of something that went into the sound engine with 10, because it does sound different. So with the new upgrades from 9 to 10, what are some of the things that you're most excited about as far as like devices, effects, or anything else?
There's quite a bit. I think capture is a bit of a headline for me. I mean, I'll never go back to traditional recording MIDI notes again. This idea that Live is always listening and will capture your ideas even if you forget to press record. For me personally, I'm really excited about the echo device.
Yes.
I've always wanted a Roland Space Echo, can't really afford it. And I've heard there's maintenance issues and all this.
I'm sure, yeah.
And to me, having that kind of a go-to delay device is really nice. And I find so much of my life is spent tweaking things just to sound right to my ears. Echo just really nails it. No matter what I do to the knobs and the parameters, I'm getting a really musical result. I find it difficult to make it really sound bad. And a great example of that is the input section. It's set up so that you can intentionally crank it up and overdrive the sound,
right?
And it will respond in an analog-like way. That again I find really musically pleasing. Sometimes I use echo just for the input saturation alone, and I'll use that on drums, for example.
Oh, that's cool.
Or individual drum hits on a drum rack. I find it's a different flavor of saturation and distortion than what you would get in pedal or a drum bus.
That's awesome.
So I'm using drum bus a lot too. Obviously, as a drummer, I record myself, and now I just throw drum bus on there, and click the compressor. To me, you just turn it on, and it's already dialed into the sweet spot.
It's instant magic. It's great.
Yeah, so I'm getting a lot out of that. Some things that maybe a lot of people don't notice right away. If you go into the packs, there's new sound content. There's electric pianos, and it's really focused on quality. You get these meticulously sampled Fender Rhodes, Hammond tone wheel organ, and Wurlitzer.
That's good to know. It's more toys to play with.
And again, they just sound right to me. I find that, and try putting echo or a pedal on those electric pianos.
Okay.
It just really sounds sweet to me.
Oh, for sure.
If you go into there's a new pack called Drum Booth, which again are these meticulously recorded samples of dry acoustic percussion. And it's got all the normal hi-hats, snare drums, kick drums, toms, things you'd expect. But if you go into the 64 pad packs, and especially if you have a push, there's some sounds that are like fingers on the snare drum. So each of the 64 pads is a different color and a slightly different variation of a finger on a snare drum. And as you go out to the rim or out to and into the center, it emulates exactly like playing an acoustic drum. And
that's cool.
It's just really interesting to me that points potentially to the future of instrument design or packs and samples and how you might perform and play them with push, just to get so many different expressive tones out of a single instrument played on push.
Right.
I'm really inspired by that idea, and I'm excited to see where that goes. There's new these curated sound packs with names like Chop and Swing and Drive and Glow, and they're all mix ready, radio ready sounds that are designed to be played and to get you in a creative workflow as fast as possible. So, if you talk about finger drumming, that stuff is just really effective. I was just in a Guitar Center playing with my hands on push, and this guy came up to me and offered to buy the beat in the store. Awesome. And I'm like, dude, I'm just playing the new sounds in Live 10.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's what I love. You mentioned quality over quantity. It seems like there's so many packs. People are creating so many different sample libraries now, and I'm so happy to hear that Ableton is really investing into the highest quality packs and not focusing on quantity, but just coming up with things like Echo, and it's a brilliant device and it sounds amazing. Like you were saying earlier, I love that thing. It's like the filter delay and the reverb and ping pong delay had a baby, and its name was Echo, and it sounds fantastic. I love it. I love the video that you guys, Ableton, posted the other day. It was an Atari race car driver game, and you were just playing with the input and the different delays for the left and the right, and it was creating a race car sound. It was pretty awesome. So no, absolutely, thank you for sharing that. I'll have to check out some of the Wurlitzer and those other things you're talking about with the drums and the pack section, so everybody else go check that out too. Ableton acquired Max last year, correct? How, I guess, is this going to change, I guess, the user experience, or is there anything in the works that we can look forward to with this new development, or maybe you can even talk a little bit how this is really valuable for Ableton and its users?
Yeah, it's good news for everyone. Ableton's had a long-standing relationship with Cycling 74, so the acquisition in many ways just formalizes what's already existed. But now everything in terms of sharing what we're working on and collaborating on more effectively, you can already see that with Live 10, where Max for Live is now 100% integrated, runs seamlessly inside of Live. It's part of the installation. It loads on startup. All of the new Max for Live devices in Live 10 look like native devices in Live, and it's just going to get better from there, from here.
Cool. Yeah, can you maybe explain a little bit to those who aren't familiar with Max what Max is, really quick?
I mean, it's, I think, best described as an environment for creating software for media artists.
Right.
A colleague of mine describes it as, if Ableton Live is the kitchen that you cook your meal in, the meal being the metaphor for making music, then Max MSP is like the tools that you use to build the kitchen in the first place.
Right.
And then
it's the KitchenAid, really.
Yeah. And then the same guy, my colleague Ben Casey in New York, also describes it as digital duct tape. In the sense, specifically, with Max for Live as well. Right. There's so many things that you can do to hack the software, the hardware, right, to make it do things that maybe its creators never intended. Hence the digital duct tape. Right.
Yeah, and you can do anything with duct tape. Really, you can fix anything. I fixed my car with duct tape before. So
yeah, when you put it on the acoustic cymbals, it leaves a residue. So I recommend gaff tape has been my go-to recently.
That's a good point
for your cymbals and for the rug too.
It's not always necessary, but it can be useful. Right? Exactly. That's a really good analogy. I love it. But the push controller was like Ableton's first controller completely made in-house. Before they worked with like Akai and some other companies to create, collaborate on controllers. But the Push was Ableton's first completely made controller on their own. Will there be any new controllers in the future that maybe we might look forward to completely made by Ableton? Or is that something you're allowed to share?
Well, the product team in Berlin is constantly working on new ideas. And there's always a lot of new things in development. A lot of it's really exciting and I think surprising. But I think as you might have realized, we as a company doesn't constantly flood the market with new products, and the goal is very much to improve the things that we do release. So you'll notice in Live 10, Push has gotten a huge upgrade now. You can see the MIDI notes of the piano roll in the screen display. The compressor and the EQ8 have new visualizations, so now you can use Push as a viable mixing tool as well.
Sure.
So that's going to keep happening. Push is going to keep improving. The original Push 1s are still being supported and updated with new features and improvements.
Yeah. So that was something we were talking about in the recent podcast episode. I was interviewing one of my friends, Ben, who's a Push wizard, and he was talking about that, how one thing he loves about Ableton is you guys continue to support older products like the Push 1. It's not like, all right, well, we're doing the new thing, we're just going to leave the old behind, but you guys are continuing to update and keeping up to tabs with those who are still using, more outdated controllers or versions of Ableton, which is great.
Yeah, I heard someone in one of the product teams in Berlin was talking about Push in relation to being inspired by, say, a Fender Rhodes or a Gibson Les Paul, that this is something that we're very committed to, and that will stick around for a very long time.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. It shows how much you guys care about your users and about what's happening. So that's awesome. Those were a lot of the main questions I had for you. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about Ableton 10 or any updates that maybe a lot of people might not be aware of?
Now, it being release day, it's available for free to try if you haven't already checked out any of this exciting stuff with Live 10. It's literally all the features free for 30 days. You can go to ableton.com, download the trial demo, register it with your email address, and you could create, mix, and master an album in 30 days.
Yeah.
And after that time, it's only saving and exporting that's disabled. So you could do everything for free.
That is nice. Yeah, that's great. So if you aren't already playing with the Ableton, now is your chance to play with the new Live 10. And there's all kinds of fun new toys that we've talked about to go do that. Also,
I guess, a fun fact, too, about Live 10 is just how many little improvements, updates, and refinements have been in there. Last time I checked, there were 378 individual things that have been made better with Live 10.
Yes, there were a lot. I think it was 12 pages, actually, because I went through and I read all of them, and it took a while. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I was surprised how many shortcuts were added. There's a lot of shortcuts, and I feel like editing an arrangement view is like so much quicker now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we get blinded by these new shiny devices. Talking about echo and pedal and drum bus and headline features like capture, but there are so many small workflow things, and like you mentioned, arrangement view stuff, things with automation, the hotkeys. If you already have Live 10, the best thing to do might be to go to the help view and then click on what's new in Live 10 is the top option, and that will take you through a guided tour of all the new improvements.
Perfect. That's a great tip. Yeah. So definitely go do that. All right. Well, cool. Thank you, Thomas. We're running a little bit out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, penciling us into your busy schedule. Everybody, you can go check out and get the free download of Ableton Live 10 at ableton.com. Also, thank you for listening. If you are listening to this podcast and you want to learn how to use Ableton, learnabletononline.com is a website that we are developing, sponsoring this podcast, and we will be sharing with the new website release coming in April. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, then we'll push you some updates on the launch of that website, and then you should be getting some free tutorials on how to use Ableton as a beginner, and we'll have some more advanced tutorials and blog posts as well to share with you. So learnabletononline.com if you guys want to check that out. Thanks again, Thomas, for joining us. You're awesome, and I love what you guys are doing over there in Berlin and here in the States. And I'm looking forward to hanging out with you when you come to Indy. We'll have a good time.
And thanks for having me as a guest.
Awesome, fun. Man. Yeah, for sure. You too, man. Thanks, Thomas. Talk soon.
Great. Thanks.
Awesome.
This podcast is sponsored by LearnAbletonOnline.com, a community of Ableton Live users connecting you to the pros to learn today's music production.